up and sit down.
Howdy guys, this is Andy from Bigmeks Workshop Painting Studio, and today we're painting a Lord Discordant. Now this is a really cool model, really weird looking. You can tell by the serious influence of Chaos that it's a demon engine of some description, and I'm sure you guys already knew this. Have a look at the model. As you can see, there's loads of detail to work with, loads of trim to play around with, and we're going to do things a little bit different to what I would normally do. As you can see, we started off with a black prime. So this is not going to be an airbrush tutorial, it's a hand painted tutorial, but I'm just getting a base coat done with the airbrush just to get it a nice flat silver. Now you can do this with a rattle can or anything else, and myself obviously I've got an airbrush to hand, so that's what I'm using. Now this is a base coat of Thrash Metal by Scale 75, which is sort of a mid-tone silver. Getting a good quality coat of that. Now, as you can see, moving on to the armour plates. Now I'm doing this in a reverse system, so I'm painting a trim using the spray, and I'm painting all the panels in. Makes life a little bit easier, you don't have to have as much paint control. For the panels I'm using a base coat of Innsmouth Blue by Scale 75 as well. There's going to be a lot of Scale 75 stuff on this, but I'm also using some GW paints as well, and some of the other paints you'll recognise. So as you can see, I'm just getting a really thin coat on there, so it's going to take a couple of layers just to get that nice thick, I say thick, but you know what I mean, a nice smooth base coat over all the panels. As you can see, I'm just doing this on the leg at a minute, but I'm doing the exact same thing across the entire figure, but it's just a little bit redundant, showing you anything what you've already seen. So now, as you can see, it's sub-assembled, making a good start on the armour, and I'm working onto the skin now, which is going to be a really weird, grimy, grey, pinky colour. Very hard to describe. I'm using Leandrus Grey, which is a Scale 75 colour again. I'm using that as a base coat for the any of the flesh and the weird like brain stems in the back end as well. Just getting a bit of a feel for what bits are what. I'm just sort of blocking some colours in just to give me some kind of idea of what we're working with. The next layer is Balthazar Gold, and I'm going to just add some sort of trim colours into the model, using some of the weird little details. Balthazar Gold needs a real good shake, which is something I failed to do before, and I'm going to just start picking some details out in the Balthazar Gold and just adding some interesting detail work to the model, getting those extra lines in, just breaking up some of the colour around the model. So I've now broken some of the model up a little bit. I'm going to add some Resurrection Flesh, again Scale 75, it's kind of a pinky grey colour, and I'm just starting to glaze up onto the skin. Just start to pick up the highlights. I'm really just trying to take away some of that purple. I want that being more of an undertone than an actual colour, and just bringing those muscle textures together, making it look really weird. And as you can see, I'm just building up ever so slowly, using really thin paint. And just take your time. This is the sort of thing what's going to take a lot of layers just to break it up a little bit and really move them colours around, so you get some really interesting effects. So as you can see, I've added some more of the Resurrection Flesh in, so it's pretty much 50-50 at this point. And as you can see, it's starting to just make the sort of purpley pink colour with that sort of grey undertone. And what you're getting is some kind of weird kind of demon hybrid flesh, just to make it look really weird. And that's the sort of thing you want to go for with this sort of thing. So there's no real rules when it comes to painting demon engine flesh. You just make it look a bit odd. So now it's pretty much Resurrection Flesh at this stage. I'm going for a quick layer of that. Again, really thin. This is pretty much coloured water at this stage. and just building those colours up really gently, and you can just start to see the pink at the top just coming through a little bit, and you're going to get that really weird demon colour. So after that, I'm adding even more into it. Now it's pretty much resurrection flesh. As you can see, it's starting to become more of a unhealthy skin tone now. So after this, we're going to start mixing some washes, start to add the detail into it, and make their muscle textures start to stand out. And it's going to really start pulling the colours together, really make it look weird, and get an interesting effect on the muscle textures. So now we're using Army Painter's Red Tone, and we're just starting to give a nice gentle wash. This is really thinned down, so it's going to take a couple of coats just to build up some colour. But this, again, you're not wanting thick colours on this. You want it just to bring it up together slowly. And at this stage, I'm using a really thinned down ATHONIAN camo shade as well, and that's going to be worked towards the creases. Making it look a really bit grimy, a bit dirty, maybe a little bit bruised. So it's going to get add some more depth to the skin, whilst also adding a bit more colour to it as well. So it brings it more to life. And I'm going to stretch that, stretching those washes across the entirety of the skin work. Now I'm adding another layer of the resurrection flesh, and that's just pulling everything together, and you're going to get a nice highlight over the top. So as you can see, it's starting to become a bit more alive now with the extra layers of resurrection flesh over the top of the washes. And I'm just going to keep on layering that up onto the skin work, adding a little bit of a Miskatonic grey, which is again another scale 75. It's kind of a purpley grey, and this is going to be highlighting the skin, making it look really weird, really bright, but also allows us to, if we need to, because it's got that sort of grey tone to it, it mixes in nicely with the deeper colours as well. So it's really, you get a really nice balance between the two flesh colours and the greys. So you can now just start moving around with the washes just to add the extra depth in there and bring the colours together. So here we go, we're just adding some more really thin down red shade and a little bit of ATHONIAN camo shade as well, and just to bring those muscle textures together. As you can see, it's I'm really pulling it away from the model. I want to just focusing it right into the recesses, so you get the extra depth where the armour hits the model. So a little bit of ATHONIAN camo shade now, and that's going more onto the centre of the skin and then pulled into the recesses. This is just to add a bit of more grimy, gritty colour to the skin, where it's most likely going to be seen. Now, some of this is going to be under a helmet, but this is why we sub-assembly, so you get a really nice quality colour over the top. So now I'm using Decay Black, but any black will do. I'm just adding these to back to the claws, teeth things, just to break it up again, because they're going to be sort of an unhealthy black colour for the teeth. I just figured that would make it look quite interesting. So you've got that pale skin tone next to the black teeth. So the next layer from the black is black grey. I'm using a scale 75 one, but there's a lot of different colours out there doing the same thing. Etching grey is pretty good for this one, and it's just an edge highlight over the forward leaning tips of the teeth, and another layer of this is a necromancer cloak, which is a bit like Incubi Darkness, that sort of colour, and I'm just using a 00 just to get a nice fine highlight over the edges of them teeth, just where the leading edges is, just to brighten them up a touch. So now the top highlight is Ash Grey by Army Painter. Nice bright grey. Any mid grey will work for this, and it's just a final edge highlight right on the tips of the teeth things. So next it is the pipe work and what have you, and this is using Filthy Brown by Game Colour. I'm using that because it's a really good colour to go over anything when you want to do any kind of yellow work. You can use it over blacks, any dark colours. As you can see, you get a real good coverage. I'm also doing it on a weird poison drop things. I want a sort of a yellow, unhealthy poison look on there. After the Filthy Brown, I've gone over with a little bit of Soft Tone by Army Painter. This is basically Agrax Earthshade, but obviously it's really thinned down, so you can get a nice good control over it. Once the soft tone's dried up, once the soft tone's dried up, I'm using Pale Yellow by Model Game Colour Vallejo paint, and I'm just starting to add some highlights onto the pipe work, making them look a bit more interesting. I did actually mess up on the other side. I started to do hazard stripes first, realising I needed to finish up doing the highlights first before I started doing any black work. I'm also adding the same colours into the poison drops just to bring them up together, but I'm going to do a little bit different, a little bit more wash work on them just to make them look really filthy and nasty and unpleasant. So now I'm starting to add some hazard stripes onto the pipes using Decay Black again. And I'm just going around adding some lines, trying to keep them as neat as possible, and trying to keep the spacing even. And then I'm going to go around and tidy it all up again, making everything look a little bit neater, a little bit more organised. So here we go. Realised on the other side that I hadn't finished highlighting the pipe work, and that is some more Pale Yellow, which I've added a little bit of bone into it. And I'm adding a soft tone over the top just to add a little bit more depth. So there we are, got some highlights on the yellows, and I'm going to just come back to highlight the black using the same colours as I used on the on the teeth. So next it is Violet, which I'm going around some of the pipe work. Well, to be fair, most of the pipe work is going to be done in violet, just a nice breakup colour from the bluey green armour, just to brighten things up a little bit. Also adds a little bit more colour to it as well. And I'm just using any colour like this will do. If you want something what's just going to break up some of these flat planes, what you've got knocking about. So now I'm adding Brainy Azure onto the pipe work. Apologies for the jump there. This is a light purple, and I'm just adding that over the top of the violet paintwork, trying to avoid any of the open sections of the piping. And I've added some Leandris Grey to the same mix, and this is just a nice top highlight over the top. This is quite scruffy at the minute. I wasn't totally happy with this, so I've come back and started to just tie it up a little bit just to make it look a bit better. But so long as you do what you feel looks right, you'll get a good result at the end of it anyway. So now I'm using Armoured Painter's Strong Tone. Again, this is thinned down quite heavily. I'm using that all over the any of the pipes what I've painted purple. This is just to add a little bit of depth. It breaks up them flat purples as well. A couple of layers of this, and it really starts to make things look a bit more grimy. It looks a lot better. So this is also Norm oil going into any of the bare metal sections now. I'm starting to add a little bit of depth into them. Also going to go over all the armour work as well, wherever the metal is just plain. So this time it's Hash Up Copper going over the Balthazar Gold. This is going straight over the top, leaving a little bit of a Balthazar Gold showing, but I'm trying to get a nice smooth coat over this. Again, it's GW metallic, so you need to get a real good shake, more so than any other metallic, but it's still pretty good stuff. You get a really nice coverage when you get a good mix on it. Next is Runelord Brass, and that's going over the top of the Hash Up Copper. Again, leaving some of the other two colours showing, and it's just going to bring everything up to a nice bright coloured highlight, and it's really starting to add a bit of more variety in the colour to the model. So now I'm using Agrax Earthshade rather than Army Painted Strong Tone. Basically the same colour as I've already said. It's just I have that one to hand at that particular moment, and just adding the depth onto the with the wash onto the copper colours. It really does start to make a difference when you start adding these washes in as well. So next is German Grey by Vallejo Model Colour, and that's going over all of the pipework near the primary weapon. It's going to be kind of a Incubi darknessy colour in the end. I'll just try to make something a little bit different to some of the other pipework, because it looked like it was getting a lot of the same colours. So next is Incubi Darkness going over the top, pretty much straight over. Obviously with some bare metal works again, just trying to leave them uncovered by the paint, as I want to keep them silver. So now it's Incubi Darkness straight now. Obviously it's been thinned down a little bit, and as you can see, just starting to add some extra highlights onto it. Not being particularly neat at this stage. You don't really need to be. Any of the handles and all that sort of stuff, keeping with the same colour. I'm just trying to add some extra colour without taking too much away from the basics, from the core of a model. So now it is a Dark Reaper, and now I've got some Dark Reaper. Adding that onto the upper highlights of the piping. It's just to really bring it out. As you can see, it takes it to a similar sort of colour to the armour plating as well, but it's suitably different to make it not look like it's all one thing and make it look boring. So back onto the trim now, starting to add a proper highlight onto it, and that is using Thrash Metal. Now I'm keeping some of the darker colours to visible, as you know, you want to leave the colour transitions visible to the eye, but you don't want too much of it, because obviously we've got a lot to work with. So just being really careful to be quite as neat as possible, and then we can move on to the next stage, which is Scale 75's Heavy Metal. Now this is again just focusing towards the edges of all the trim work, trying to keep it as neat as possible, but obviously it takes a long time, so I'm going to show you just on the one section, and this is just going to go all around all of the edges. And then finally it is Vallejo's Model Air Coloured Steel. I'm just trying to keep it right towards the leading edges. It's not going all over all of the metal work, unlike the other two colours. It's just to add one last highlight onto the trim, just to get everything looking really smart. So once that's drying up, I'm now going onto the saddle, which is a Dryad Bark. This is a Games Workshop colour, as you can see, and getting a nice good quality coverage over it. You can't really see the saddle once it's all put together, but there is some visibility to it, so you do need to make sure you at least put a couple of layers on there. So the next is Dryad Bark with Bosch Chestnut. Bosch Chestnut's a Scale 75 paint. I'm just starting to add some highlights onto it all the way around, keeping it nice and simple, really basic highlights at this point. So now it's pure Bosch chestnut. I'm just starting to add that onto the upper areas now, leaving only a little bit of the original two colours down, as this is going to just start to add the extra little colours to it and really make it stand out. So I've added some scale 75 sandalwood into the colours now, and that is just going to finish off those highlights. Again, you don't have to be over the top neat on this one because you can barely see it, but it is good practice to at least put some highlights on there, just to make sure that from any weird angles you're going to be able to see the extra work's gone into it. So now going into shading on the armour plates. Now, as you can see, working from about the lower third of the leg on this particular model is Despair Green by Scale 75. Now it's a nice shade down from the Innsmouth Blue, and I'm only working towards the bottom end of it, and as you can see I'm just bringing the colour into it. This is really thin down paint, so I'm giving me a lot of time to work with the paint and get that a nice transition from the mid colour to the dark colour. So when that's dried, I've got Deep Blue by Scale 75, and this is going right into the recesses, and it's just getting focused into any of the most darkest areas, and it just transitions nicely from the Despair Green, and you can see how the transition's going to change and just make it really subtly darker. So for the highlights on the armour sections, I've used a mix of Rylith Grey and Hellbound Flesh, and that's just a nice gentle transition up from the Innsmouth Blue, and you get a nice vibrant colour, but without it being overpowering to the base colours. So I've added a little bit more Rylith Grey. I've added a little bit more Hellbound Flesh into the colour, and that's just going right up to the top areas of the armour plating and doing this across the entire model. It's just easier to show you on a leg because there's a little bit less to it. So now I'm just doing some edge highlighting on some of the more extreme areas. This is pure Hellbound Flesh, and that's just going on any of the leading edges around the most upper reaches of the model. And onto the there's some like damage across some of the paint sections, and I'm just using a little bit of ivory onto the edge on the edges of the damage sections. It just brightens it up a little bit. You can see the armour plating where it's been scratched now a little bit more. Trying to be as neat as possible, but it's not massively important because I'm going to throw some washes into the recesses as well, just to break up that pure whiteness and get that nice depth into it as well. So I'm just a little bit more off-white now for a second highlight around those damaged sections, and just to brighten it up a little bit, and adding that extra layer of highlights really does help. So whilst all that's going off, I'm now onto the bloke, and this is Corn Red by Games Workshop. Now as you can see, it's really thin down. It's going to take a couple of layers to get a good coverage over this, but it's totally worth it, as obviously you know you're going to get a much smoother coat, much more even finish over it. So once I've got a good coat on that is now MEPHISTON Red mixed into corn. It's about 50-50. I'm just starting to bring out the movement in the cloak focusing on the higher areas, but because it's a 50-50 mix, you can bring it into the deeper areas as well, so you get a really smooth transition. That'll make the model look a lot better in the long run when you get these nice transition, smooth highlights over the model. So this is just pure MEPHISTON red, and I'm keeping that inside the previous layer, so you get sort of a banded transition, but it's very difficult to see with a naked eye. And I'm just taking my time. There's no rush to doing this, and I'm making sure that any of the previous layers can be seen, although maybe not overpoweringly. So after that, it's a red tone wash mixed in with some thinners, and that's going to bring the colours together. After it's dried, it's now MEPHISTON red with just MEPHISTON red, and that's going to highlight the areas what have been toned down, mixed together with the red tone. It's also going to bring some of the older colours back up again a little bit, and this is just going to the red tone is really there just to blend the colours together somewhat, and then you can go back over the top with the bright colour and really make those highlights stand out. So I've now added some game colour hot orange into the MEPHISTON red, and this is just going to really make those final highlights pop. Keep it nice and thin. You want as much control over it as possible. You don't want these bands to be particularly thick. You just need to just touch those highlights and make them look really cool. So now it's onto the trim work again. Now I'm going to break up some of the silver with old copper by Scale 75. That's going to make it look really interesting, brighten everything up a little bit, and just add a little bit of variety onto the model. So some of the trim work's getting done. I'm also doing the blades on his halberd in the same, because I didn't want it to be standard silver. Just breaking it all up a bit, making it look a bit interesting. So all the skulls around him are all getting done much the same way. So next is a wriggling flesh shade over the copper. This is just going to add a bit of depth. It also changes the colour somewhat, makes it a bit more red. So when the highlights go over the top, it really does enrich the colours. So next is Victorian brass, going straight over the top of the Reetland, and this is going to really add some nice bright vibrant sheen to it, making the highlights really pop. And you're just going to spread those that colour around, leaving some of the darker colours behind, but not too much of it. Next is Amber Alchemy, which is going right up the top, and as you can see, it's just adding a final highlight right onto the right onto those skulls, making it look really vibrant and getting some real nice highlights onto it. So next is a little bit of moonstone, which is just going to be like the top highlight on all of the gold areas. Once all this is down, I'm going to put a couple of black washes into all the silver work just to bring them all together, maybe throw a couple of minor highlights onto it, and that's it basically done. I had to do some of the certain areas off camera, which was a shame, but that's purely down to the size of the sections, such as the eyes, that weird sort of little cyber eye he's got going on. I also added a few little bits of airbrush work off camera as well, just to add some finishing details. But there you go, that is in a nutshell a Lord Discordant by Games Workshop. Absolutely cracking model, loads of detail to work with, so yeah, you can really go to town in this one. So I hope you like this video. Please hit like, share with your friends, and if you want to get involved with our stuff, please subscribe if you haven't already, and check us out on Patreon if you're interested, where we've got a whole bunch of benefits, including double entries into all of our competitions. Got a few thank yous to make, so I would like to thank the York Boys, Matt, Ludwig Goffbauer, D-Wack, Mark and Dave. You're our top paying patrons, so huge thank you to you, because without you we couldn't do any of this. I also like to thank the Outpost, where you get discount models for any of your hobby needs. If you check out our affiliate link below, there you will also give us 5% store credit at no cost to yourself, so you're just helping us in a huge way by allowing us to get more tutorials out through purchasing anything from the Outpost. So thank you for watching this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. This was my first video after, for a while, so probably a little bit sketchier than normal. I am trying to improve all the time. I'm trying to improve with the editing as well. So I will catch you in the next one, guys, and take care and see you soon.